In 55 BC, Julius Caesar led an extraordinary campaign to conquer Europe. His advance was halted at the River Rhine, but Caesar was not deterred. His writings claim that in just 10 days his troops built a massive timber bridge. But how they did it is a mystery. Now, a British engineer will try to rebuild that first ever crossing of the Rhine. Chris Wise led the team that designed the new Millennium Bridge across the Thames in London.
Well, I'm standing on the site of the first new bridge in London for over 100 years, and it goes from the banks of the River Thames over there by St Paul's Cathedral right across to the new Tate Gallery. And that's about 200 metres. That's half as far as Caesar with his bridge at the Rhine. Caesar only had timber, basic tools, and his troops, and yet he says he did the bridge in 10 days. Our bridge is going to take a year to do, and you've got to say that's, for him to do it in 10 days is a fairly amazing achievement. I'm looking forward to finding out how the hell he did it.
By 58 BC, the Romans had spread from Italy to dominate the Mediterranean. But the tribes of Gaul had not yet been subdued by the might of Rome. Julius Caesar and 6 legions marched north and took the ancient tribes by storm. By June of 55 BC, after a fierce and bloody campaign, Caesar reached the Rhine, at the point where it is joined by the Mosel, close to the present-day town of Koblenz. It was a natural boundary halting his advance into the territory of the German tribes. Horst Fehr is an archaeologist who's made a special study of this area.
Caesar, when he went to the Rhine, he came probably over these mountains, crossed the mountains with his troops, reached the flat landscape of Neuwieder Becken, and immediately he stood in front of the mighty river. And there he got the idea to cross the river, not by boat, to build there a bridge.
Most of what we know comes from Caesar's own writings in a journal called The Gallic War. He deemed it scarcely safe and ruled it unworthy of his own and the Romans' dignity to cross in boats. And so, although he was confronted with the greatest difficulty in making a bridge by reason of the breadth, the rapidity, and the depth of the river, he still thought he must make that effort. The whole work was completed in 10 days, and the army was taken across.
It was really one of the widest rivers Caesar ever has seen. It was about 500 meters wide and between 6 and 8 meters deep. That's quite a lot of water, and not a baby river.
Although Caesar left no drawings of the bridge, his account does contain tantalizing clues. Caesar caused pairs of balks, 18 inches thick, to be coupled together at an interval of 2 feet. These he lowered into the river and drove home by rammers, not straight up and down, but leaning forward at a uniform slope so that they inclined in the direction of the stream. But turning Caesar's text into practical plans is not easy. Many different versions have been suggested by historians and military men. Emperor Napoleon III, a great admirer of Caesar, had his architect draw up plans, but still many questions remain.
One of the things that was particularly difficult for him was to drive the foundation piles into the bottom of the Rhine. And at the Thames, we have a very similar sort of foundation material. It's gravel. It's actually quite hard to bank things in. Caesar had a machine, he says, and he would try and bang the piles in with his machine. It's hard enough with that piece of timber, but the piles that Caesar used to support his bridge were 1 foot 6 inches across. Absolutely huge pieces of timber. And there's no evidence as to how he actually banged them in, so one of the things we've got to work out is how on earth he did it.
So Chris must find ways to drive in inclined piles to form trestles, top each one with a massive beam, and then add decking to form a bridge. Joining him are project manager Mike O'Rourke and Damien Goodburn, an expert on ancient carpentry. Together they plan to solve this 2,000-year-old mystery.
What I've done is some calculations to try and work out how strong the piles were, how strong this crossbeam was, and that sort of thing. Because the only thing we know from the journal, from Caesar's description, is the size of these pieces. So what I'm trying to work out now is whether or not it's possible to actually physically join it together using the technology that we know the Romans had.
Well, my perspective is based on actually digging up Roman technology in the form of ancient woodwork along the River Thames here, mainly. At least all the woodwork we dig up, it's all square.
Right.
For one thing, and
Even the piles.
Even the piles?
yes, the piles, everything.
I understand that if he had time, but I mean, this guy, he was going over to invade another country. You know, he had a limited amount of time to put this bridge together, and the last thing he's going to do is go out and square off trees.
Well, you're speaking from the perspective of a modern engineer in a modern context. I'm
thinking from a practical point of view, actually.
Exactly. What's your definition of practical is not necessarily a Roman definition of practical.
Chris has already had some ideas for a special kind of pile rig that could hammer the timbers into the river bed at the slanting angle that Caesar describes.
And then to drive the pile into the river, you let go, and it goes bang.
But before going any further with the reconstruction, Chris goes to Germany to follow in the footsteps of the Romans. He meets Horst in the town of Trier, which became the northern centre of the Roman Empire. It still boasts impressive reminders of their building expertise, especially the magnificent basilica.
I just think it's absolutely amazing piece of Roman architecture.
I think so too.
The other thing I like is, I mean, the roof is a timber roof. I think it's amazing that all that time ago the Romans could do a roof. Spans 29 to 30 meters, maybe 100 feet or so. I just think it's fantastic. I mean, it just shows that the Romans really did know something about timber.
Yeah.
Above all, though, Chris has come to Germany to see the Rhine.
Caesar didn't have to worry about the roads. Not like this anyhow. Which side of the river did Caesar come from?
From the right side here,
From here.
because on the right side, this was always a Roman Empire at that time.
What was on the other side then?
The Germans, and nothing else.
Hostile Germans.
Chris is most interested in some Roman timbers Horst found in the river back in 1980. Could they have been part of Caesar's bridge?
Here in front of this white building, we have found the right bridgehead.
Just here, yeah.
Here, and the left one was opposite the construction crane here on the left side.
Right. How did you know there was a bridge there?
There was a rumor always, and when they found some bigger pieces of wood on the riverbed, it was always told, this has been Caesar's bridge.
To investigate further, Horst used a ship fitted with a diving bell, which let him walk on the river bed. The timbers were set so firmly that he could only recover them by attaching them by chains and raising the bell itself.
What's happened to them now?
We took off more than 50 of them and brought them to our office, just
Your office?
In this castle. All these finds, they are archaeological pieces, show you the piles, the rest of more than 50.
Are these the piles?
These are the piles. It is all oak.
They're amazing, aren't they? Huge.
Condition. They are.
It's great that most of them are round, because Damien told me that they'd be square, so Looking forward to telling him that they're round.
It's this one here, it is square. Yeah.
You think that might, but could that have been part of the construction of the bridge itself?
This is what I believe.
A beam or something
Yeah,
like that?
from the upper part of the construction.
Yeah. Well, that fits reasonably well with, that's much better fit with what Damien was telling me about.
Ah, yeah.
Amongst the timbers, Horst also found pointed metal shoes that would have helped the Romans when driving the piles into the gravel of the river.
That fits on the end and then gets nailed.
Only one nail
Yeah.
here always. And the same type is used modern times.
This is Roman as well.
This is Roman, it's from the Roman bridge.
But the true origin of these timbers was uncertain until they'd been dated using the science of dendrochronology. Archaeologist Mechthild Nisus specializes in dating wood by using a slice to examine the growth rings for clues.
Growth is not a continuous process, it's different in each year and depends on the prevailing growth conditions. So therefore you have wide rings or narrow rings, so you get a special tree ring pattern.
This pattern can be matched up with a master database, a sort of timeline of tree rings to give a pretty accurate date for the year the tree was felled. And so, was this a slice of timber from Caesar's Bridge?
No, this couldn't be from Caesar's Bridge. The whole series of the piles from the Roman Bridge of Koblenz, the felling year was in 48-49 AD.
So the piles Horst found were from another Roman bridge built 100 years after Caesar's. These timbers were still growing in 55 BC. But although there are no remains of his bridge, there's every chance Caesar's timbers would have come from the same kind of tree.
The Roman preferred a special sort of oak. It's called sessile oak. The sessile oak stood on the slopes and ridges of this region. And sessile oak grows taller and straighter than other oak.
The Romans were known to have saws, but Damien reckons that felling would have been done with an axe.
Now, the Roman army would probably have had an axe similar to this, with a fairly narrow blade, but we know from archaeological finds that quite often they had another kind of pick-like point on the other side, and that tool was called a dolabra, which seems to have been a sort of general-purpose tool that a lot of the troops carried with them.
Hundreds of mature oaks would have been felled for the bridge. Damien wants to find out how long it might take to turn just one of these giants into usable timber.
Look out! It's going that way!
After just 45 minutes, this tree is ready for building. To find a suitable site for their reconstruction, the team have come to another outpost of the Roman Empire near Hadrian's Wall in the north of England. Here the North Tyne will match both the riverbed and the current of the Rhine. And here, to equal Caesar's achievement, Chris reckons that with a small workforce, he needs to assemble the Roman machinery and build the bridge in 7 days. First, Mike O'Rourke tries to find the right spot for the piling.
It's certainly a lot harder than we thought it would be. A lot more rocks. And I think it's going to be fun. And interesting.
To supply the military might, a local regiment of the Territorial Army has agreed to take part. Today's Royal Engineers are the modern equivalent of Caesar's troops, and up the road they've just built a Bailey Bridge in under 30 hours. Now they're about to spend a week as Roman bridge builders. For most of the timbers on this project, Chris just can't afford oak. He's using mainly larch and spruce. The team starts on a bridgehead from which the main construction will march across the river. Work begins too on a raft to carry the pile rig into position. To save timber, Chris reckons plastic barrels will give the same buoyancy as the tree trunks that the Romans would have used. But one special log is oak. A huge, locally felled tree trunk, which Damien has agreed to square up, using just hand tools. It will become the top beam for the first trestle. So how long will that take?
If it was to be done entirely with axes, a couple of blokes could do this in less than 2 days.
The team grows as different specialist skills are needed. David Sim is an authority on Roman ironwork.
I think that when you've got a project like this, there's got to be facilities to change things as it's being done. So you've got to have people like blacksmiths and so forth. You've also got to have somebody around who, when things go wrong, can fix it.
Expert rigger Bob Lew has come to help on the pulleys and ropes that nearly all Roman machinery relies on.
Two. Rigging principles have never ever changed, even before Julius Caesar's time. And all that's changed is the equipment. And what we're building today is really an old-fashioned crane.
David Sim starts work on an iron pile shoe based on the design that Chris saw in Germany. And just arrived, classic scholar Dr. Birgitta Hoffmann is looking forward to seeing some real Roman technology.
People have been trying to reconstruct Caesar's Bridge quite often, and usually sort of very scaled down, like trying to cross a brook using the same techniques. And what always became clear was what worked in that particular reconstruction would never work on the big scale. And this is the first time that I've actually seen something approaching the size of the Rhine Bridge.
It's not a very straight piece of timber.
It's a very bendy piece of timber.
Is that because of the sort of oak it is?
No,
Just a bad
no, it's just that obviously straight up north is not the same as straight down south. What you can see here is just one plane of the log,
Right.
and it's slightly banana shaped. Yeah, I mean that string is hanging roughly straight. If I just tension the other end, you'll see it perfectly.
There's a Roman nail.
That's the hand forward to the line.
Yeah.
That is a straight line now.
So this will be the top. That's the top bit.
Okay.
Very good. Or very
This
bad.
end, however,
It's the second day on site. With a time limit of a week to build his shorter bridge, Chris knows he must get moving.
Critical thing is to build the piling rig today.
Yep.
We've got to have it
Must
finished
get
and
the
we've got to have it
today.
complete today so that we can put the piles in tomorrow. Because we can't build any of the bridge without the piles.
Yeah.
So having built the rig, it's pile from now till Sunday, and the crane and the trestling follows through afterwards. It's very tight.
First, though, the piling rig needs a raft to float on.
We just put a bit of grease on so when it actually runs down, it's a bit slippy. It's just a normal household lard.
what we need to do now is in a controlled fashion get the raft into the water. And we can do it. Great. Let's get a hold of your tellers, people. Come on. Check.
The raft inches towards the water, and the first test of Chris's design, whether he's got the flotation right.
It's got 6 tons of buoyancy. That platform weighs about 3 tons. We've got another 3 tons to go on it, so it'll push it down more or less flat with the top.
The raft is afloat, but some believe the Romans would have found an easier way of doing it.
I would have thought they built it in the water.
They build it in the water.
With 2 boats.
Exactly.
Lash them to the bank and build a raft between the 2 boats and move the boats away.
I
and
agree.
You don't have to go through that rigmarole.
Yeah.
Now the huge timbers that will make the pyramid-shaped pile rig must be assembled. With no records of Roman designs to go on, Chris has based his plans on medieval drawings. It will consist of 2 giant A-frames, fixed, on Damien's suggestion, by a crocodile joint at the top. The real challenge, though, will be to raise the 2 frames into position.
We stick a pole up through the middle, there, which is tethered off, onto which we put a block and tackle. And Bob's got some climbing irons, and he's an expert rigger, so he'll climb up to the top and do that last connection for us.
My concern is if it's all working well, it may very well work. But if we get any instability, if things do start to go wrong, then there's only one way for it to go, and it's going to actually collapse.
To actually destabilise sideways,
Yeah.
it's unlikely unless somebody pulls it over.
Yeah.
I also think, as it happens, that it's very similar to the way that Caesar would have done it, because it's using rope, tackles, and manpower.
After just 8 hours' work, Damien has finished dressing one side of his beam.
You can probably see the pattern of tool marks on here is similar to what we excavate, what we find on the ancient timbers we dig up. But we do find the marks of adzes on some of the big timbers. They didn't always bother with finishing with an adze, but this is an adze. And it's not exactly like a Roman one again, but it's broadly similar and used in the same way.
Back on the riverbank, the second A-frame for the pile rig is nearly complete. It holds the spindles for the winding ropes.
We've just laid this A-frame out and put these 2 spindles in. We've also finished the front A-frame and put the carriage for the pile drop on the front. When it's taken us a whole day to do this. Part of the reason for that, I guess, is that Caesar had the choice of 12,000 men, and we've got less than 20 to do it. And what we're trying to do is, by the end of today, is to get the rig, all the ropes and the pulleys up at the top here, ready to lift the piling weight, and then pull the whole thing together at the bottom.
Even at this early stage of the project, they work into the night, pulling the A-frames upright.
1, 2, 3, go! Pull it! Pull it! Move it! Come on! Move it! Come on! Pull it! Okay, turn it up! Come on! That worked. Keep it going. Keep it going.
Well, at the moment, it's not too heavy, but coming up, it becomes always more heavy. And the most critical point tomorrow, from my point of view, will be to get the two legs of this A-frame down to the raft. And I'm not sure at the moment whether we will succeed or not. Really.
But a new day starts with a mood of confidence and the hope that adopting a modicum of Roman style just might bring them luck.
Who would wear one of these? Everyone. Yeah. There's no special significance in the rank from the rope then.
Yours is longer than mine. You are centurion.
Centurion?
Yeah.
Centurion?
You get the command.
Who are you? You're just an ordinary soldier.
Yeah.
Right, we'll behave then.
Chris has also designed a Roman crane, based on a single A-frame, which will be used to lift the bridge beams into position. Building that is going much more smoothly than the pile rig alongside, still waiting to be drawn together by the network of ropes and pulleys.
No one's done this for 2,000 years, and so we're trying to learn in the space of a few days all of the tricks that the Roman army would have developed over maybe tens, hundreds of years. So there's an awful lot to think about.
1, 2, 3, pull! And pull! 1,
Fantastic.
2, 3, pull!
Yes. Okay, hold it. Are we off here? Are we slipped off there? Are we?
Now there's a problem, as the teeth have snapped off on Chris's joint between the two A-frames, and the two huge structures look dangerously out of alignment.
But would it get to a point where it would stop twisting? It would actually get, the pressure would start coming off and it would be more leaning on each other rather than riding against each other? Is there a point where it would...
Everyone seems to have an idea, but what's Damien's view?
Probably not broadcastable. I think it's a silly way to do it, but there we go.
When you get up the top, how are you going to get it from there to there? That's if it hasn't collapsed before then.
We could have dug a small dock by now, put the pontoon in that, and slid the thing on sideways.
The top joint I designed is too feeble, basically. I was going to lash it originally, and I had a conversation with Damien a couple of weeks ago, and he said no, the Romans would always have jointed it, so I designed a joint for the top.
But, I mean, it looks pretty. I like the look of it. I think it's great. It'd look nice in a cafe somewhere in Islington or whatever.
But I think what we're going to do now is lift it up and probably lash it together. We might in the end put a bolt through or a nail through or something.
Shouldn't be pessimistic about it though. Hopefully it will work.
After realigning the A-frames, they start pulling again.
1, 2, 3, pull! 1, 2, 3, pull! 1, 2, 3, pull! 1, 2, 3, pull!
Hold it!
Hold it!
Hold it!
The delays and setbacks are beginning to get to Chris.
Well, can you give us a hand instead of We've got people shouting at us since we need to pick the thing up and push it.
Right, hang on. Have you got it?
Yeah, lock it off, okay?
At last, at the end of the day, the pile rig is approaching its final shape. When day 4 dawns, it's clear that while the crane is nearly finished, the delays on the pile rig are threatening the whole project. They are nearly halfway through the schedule for the complete bridge.
We were all sweating a bit last night that we were actually whether or not we're going to finish it or not. We're still confident we'll do it, but really it's taken us 3 days, best part of 3 days, to get to the point where the rig is almost in the water and floating. But to speed things up, we brought in a crane which can easily do the work of lifting these big bits of wood around without endangering anyone, which is one of the things we were worried about.
The army crane may help Chris get back on schedule, but how would Caesar have erected the pile rig?
I think we've all decided that we felt that probably what he would have done was build a bigger raft so that you can build the whole of the pile driver all on the water rather than partly on the land and partly on the water, because that's proved to be very difficult. You know, that's very stable. This is relatively unstable because it's on the water.
That's it.
Mike, does it look relatively... is it square?
Slightly over, but square.
It's almost like the drawing. It must be bigger.
No one knows what the Romans used for piling drop weights. It could have been a piece of timber encased in metal, or a carefully prepared stone. Here, it's a block of concrete weighing 3/4 of a ton.
It just fits.
Almost it looks really good.
Is this?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
More distance, it looks Roman.
Looks Roman.
It looks Roman, yeah.
Fantastic.
It looks good, really.
As the mechanized help withdraws, the scale of the task, using Roman techniques, is becoming all too clear. For Caesar scholars, it really does raise the question of why he did it.
It all depends on what Caesar actually wanted to do. And that has a lot more to do with politics than just with military. What he had done first thing in that year was actually attack a tribe he was having a conference with, which there was a truce. Now, the problem is, A, he had nearly annihilated those tribes. But on the other hand, he had broken one of the basic rules of Roman foreign policy. If you have a truce with somebody, you don't break it. So Caesar was in the position that he actually had to find a way of make people forget what he had just done. So he goes out, settles for a whole series of stunts.
And Caesar's stunts that summer didn't stop at a bridge.
And it actually goes on. He says, and then I went over to Britain. And of course, they still go. Caesar, the man who conquered Gaul, crossed the Rhine and invaded Britain, all in one easy year. And it worked a treat.
The next day promises to see the start of piling, so it's nearly all hands to preparing the timbers.
Up!
The question is how the riverbed is, whether it is rocky.
I think here it's rockier than it was at the Rhine. Okay, well, and then I think from having seen the bottom of the river, I think we should put this on. Yeah, we don't want to use the handmade nails for this.
Take the strain on the right corner.
We need to be a metre back, so if you can arrange your guys to let some off the front, take up the strain on the back.
With the rig close to its correct position, the first timber pile is hauled aboard.
Whoa, definitely tighter, you'll understand.
Nearly, slow, stop. Perfect, right
After a final check on alignment with the bridgehead, for Chris, the moment of truth approaches. He's designed a quick release mechanism for the drop weight. But will it work?
I mean, it's easy in principle. It's going to be that'll be a nerve-wracking moment when that happens for the first time. Because we don't know precisely when it's going to drop.
I'm very impressed with the quick release mechanism. It's very clever, it's safe, and it works. It's excellent.
Do you think the Romans would have thought of it?
It's quite possible. I mean, they were skilled blacksmiths. They could make something like that fairly easily. We don't know, but I mean, it's certainly possible. It's impressive. I think we need to measure whether the piles are actually going in much, though, by putting a level on them. Because I was looking at the leaves behind that pile, trying to estimate the amount it was driven.
100 mil, 4 inches.
And so it works. The pile rig is driving timbers through the stony bed of the river. Eventually the first pile is driven a metre into the riverbed, but the next problem proves to be repositioning the rig ready for the second pile.
Come on, again, come on, again.
We're going to have to do this about 10 times across the river, and it's taking bloody ages, so I think what we ought to do is just have we'll sort it out, basically.
Right. Well,
at the moment we're in a mess.
I was looking originally, but earlier I thought we'd get 4 piles in today when we looked earlier.
Well, I think we still will.
Obviously,
provided we can move the rig.
Yes.
It's a small point, but it's important, because otherwise we're going to lose a hell of a lot of time, basically.
When it comes to joining the two piles together, Caesar's Latin text is hard to interpret. The Romans certainly had nails, and David Sim can show how quick and easy it is to make them. But Caesar says the piles were held together by fibulae, although usually translated as braces. Chris doesn't really know what these are. So could there be any other meaning for the word fibula?
A fibula is in Latin basically originally a piece of metal that holds a garment together. And then it becomes more it's a piece of metal that holds something together. So all you know is it is metal. It is definitely metal.
Right. So we're none the wiser basically from that.
No.
Many aspects of Caesar's construction will remain a mystery, but Damien is keen to solve one of them. How easy is it to move by hand a huge oak beam weighing a ton?
What we're going to do now is try and actually move timber the Roman style, the way we think they move timbers for constructing quays and bridges and so on in the Roman style. They cut these grooves in the side so they could put a tow rope on so they could drag them rather than lifting them. So, everyone ready? Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Keep it moving. Keep steering it. Keep it on the stick, okay? It works. Now, we've just done a real bit of experimental archaeology. That's the theory we've been talking about, and it works well. Thank you, everyone.
It's fantastic every time that goes down. I mean, if you've been sitting on the banks of the River Rhine 55 BC, you might have seen a scene pretty much like this. This is the third pile, and during the course of today they've really shaped up brilliantly. The first time it took them a couple of hours to put the pile in. Now they're putting the piles in about 10 minutes. So they've really gone through a learning process. They've got their act together, they can turn the spindle very quickly. We've got Mike running up and down the ladder. So the whole thing's a well-oiled machine.
It's day 6, and Damien's had a brainwave about the carpentry needed to link the piles.
Are you trying to work out how they might have jointed this together?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a couple of alternatives. What we were initially thinking was that they would probably have used great big iron nails like this one here, which they'd have driven through We know they had them. We've dug them up archaeologically all over the place. That well, even longer, even a metre long.
It's a hell of a nail.
Yeah, they had to pre-bore a hole, and that took considerable time. Then they drive the nail through, and it actually go right through the two members, and then be hooked over on the other side. But there are alternatives, and something that just occurred to me this morning, which I'll show you if we shuffle the beam along a bit.
Right.
Is that what Caesar meant by fibulae may actually be what we call dogs today, which are just metal clips, really
Like a
heavy
staple.
metal clips, like a huge staple. All you have to do to hold it in place is to bang the dog in the end. You probably use a pair of them. And
Okay.
we found the marks of them in Roman timbers and so on, and even excavated smaller examples and broken big ones. So I think that's got to be the answer.
Yeah.
Easy thing for a blacksmith to make.
God, it's bloody Elvis, isn't it?
And we don't then have to drill the hole.
The Roman crane swings into action for the first time to carry the relatively lightweight bracing beams into position. But now, the big test is how to handle Damien's top beam.
Damien, what do you mean? How heavy is this piece now?
Well, it weighs around about a ton, and
Really?
yeah, it's very heavy stuff, Oak. It won't actually float when it's fresh like this. It dries out for a bit, it will, but in fresh condition like this, and obviously Caesar's timber was in fresh condition, it didn't have time to dry.
Well, here's
it just sink.
My feeling is we lift it onto the crane, onto the runway, effectively,
Yeah.
roll it into
Yeah.
position, and then pick it up in the crane
Exactly,
and
yeah.
drop it in.
Yeah.
You happy with that?
So, with floating the beam ruled out, they try using rollers to get it into a position where the crane can lift it and swing it out to the first trestle.
One potential problem, and that's whether we will be able to feed it sufficiently out into the water to turn it. Because what we have to do is slow the derrick down.
You can come back 2 metres, I think you'd be alright.
Part of the trouble is there's not much room for the beam under the windlass.
Yeah, hang on, wait a minute, what's that noise?
Oh, is that creaking?
It's creaking here.
It was just moved off there. If anybody else gets off there, the beam's in the water, so don't you dare move.
Are you sure that the Romans would have done this on the same way?
Well, I think in a nutshell, I mean, it's taken us the best part of an hour to get that beam out there, and I think it's because I've cocked it up. I made a mistake with the geometry. We couldn't take the weight on the front of the crane before we were free of the body of the crane, so it got jammed underneath this roller here and became quite unsafe. I mean, it's holding a ton at the moment. That being
Yes, it works and it looks very good.
Yeah.
It was a good test for your crane.
Yes. It's a bad test for my geometry.
The bridge is at last looking like the production line that Caesar must have had, with one well-drilled team on the piling rig and one on the crane. But Chris's geometry is letting him down again. It seems the crane can't quite reach out far enough to put Damien's beam in position on the first trestle.
If we're pulling it
I
beyond it,
don't think it'll go. I don't know whether to lower it, see if we can get it in.
and we can give it a try. I mean, we'll just pull it
It's
back
not going to
up.
go as it stands, it won't fit.
No.
The chain is too long, so we're going to lower it right into the water. It's quite shallow here. Re-rig the chain and then lift it back in so that we can lift it onto the trestle, because we're a combination of my crap geometry, the fact that we put that pile set about a third of a metre further into the water than we meant to, because it was our first pile, and the length of these chains means that we just can't quite get this into the seating on the beam. So we're going to lower it in here, re-rig it. I think if we were part of Caesar's army, I think we'd be sent to somewhere very cold for a very long time.
last, Damien's lovingly shaped beam finds its home.
Is it safe enough, Mike? Oh, it moves! My goodness!
Of course it will.
Well, those are our first ones. We were just having practice on those. These are much better. Look at these. That's pretty good.
Solid as a rock.
What's it feel like being out that high up above the water?
It's a fantastic feeling. Absolutely
It's
fantastic.
great. I think that beam is absolutely fantastic. Really fantastic.
It's a work of art.
It is a work of art.
Yeah.
You can see all the grain.
No, I must admit, I'm not completely convinced this is how Caesar's Bridge would look, but it's an awful lot more plausible than the model.
It's the last day of the project, and the decking goes on to complete the first stage of the bridge.
We've used joist to actually make the deck. What would Caesar have used for his deck?
They used, for the last layer, to build the deck here, they used branches. It becomes a thing like a road.
Actually, what do you reckon?
Yes, you know, it's a historical monument.
What this?
For us, we are standing on a Roman bridge, and it is strong enough to carry our weight.
It's the last moment of truth now. We've made the piling rig, we've put the piles in, we've moved the piling rig to the next part of the bridge. We've made the crane, we've put the trestle in. Now we've got to move the crane forward, and fingers crossed, if we can roll it forward, we've shown that we can do everything that Caesar could do to make the bridge. It could be fantastic. Seems to be going incredibly easily, actually. This whole rig weighs about 1.5 tons. In fact, with a ballast, maybe 2 tons. And Les had a very nice idea of just pulling the rope around the spindle, so using the crane to pull itself forward. So theoretically what we've got here is a 2,000-year-old mobile crane.
Now it's afternoon on the 7th day, and the team won't have time to finish the other stages of the bridge.
From here it looks as though the bridge is finished. It looks as though it goes right across to the far side. Now, I mean, my only concern about it is that, well, it would have been nice to try out the other bits, basically. And I think that if we had 3 machines and a little bit more time, we could have done it.
But they have learned a great deal about Roman engineering.
I mean, if we were to start doing this again next week, we've got the teams know what to do. So if anyone wants to ring us up next week and say, hey, you've got a Roman bridge to build, we'll say, right, well, the pile driving crew will be here Monday, and the shore party will come the next day.
The piling was a wonderful feeling. I mean, it's such a feeling of satisfaction when you make a Roman tool of this size and this nature, and it actually works as smoothly as it does.
What we did here, it is a real good part of experimental archaeology. And we succeeded. That's very important.
It's been a fantastic week. I think we've done enough in that week to show that Caesar probably could have done his bridge in 10 days. Each of these trestles and the decking together takes us about a day. Caesar had to do 40 trestles, so if he had 4 sets of men, 4 sets of machines, I think he could have done it in 10 days. To imagine these machines marching across the Rhine in the summer of 55 BC, I think it will put the fear of God into anybody on the other side, just thumping the piles in and coming through, a little bit like the War of the Worlds almost. Alien machines, and I think that would just be a fantastic thing to see. And I can understand a little bit more about why Caesar thought it would be something which would enrich the status of the Romans in the eyes of the people who were looking at them. So, just got a little bit closer to the minds of the Romans this week, I think.
But however magnificent Caesar's achievement, when the tribes in Germany had been suppressed, the bridge's short life was over. So having spent in all 18 days across the Rhine, and advanced far enough to satisfy both honor and expediency, he withdrew into Gaul and broke up the bridge.